Eagle Eye Detective Agency, Jennifer here.
Jennifer, I've got something terribly exciting to show you here at the Historical Society. I think that I have found the long-lost treasure map of Colonel Beau Blue.
You're kidding! The Civil War general who buried a fortune in Richview? That's fantastic! We'll be right there. Mrs. Arnold has run the Richview Historical Society for years. She has tons of old papers and other historical objects here.
Kids, you must have a look at this. I was tidying up the attic this morning, and I came across a padlocked chest. The chest was so old that the padlock broke apart as I lifted it. Inside was an old revolver and a scroll of parchment. The parchment is cracked with age, but it certainly looks like a map of some sort. I gave it to Mr. Arnold to examine. I'm convinced from the initials engraved on the gun and the age of the items that these belong to the famous Civil War soldier Colonel Beau Blue. We may have found the map to his buried treasure.
I've checked to be sure that the revolver isn't loaded, but guns are not something to play with. Even an ancient one like this is a dangerous weapon. Well, I'll hold it for you if you'd like to examine it. Well, I'm convinced that this revolver is authentic. It's exactly the kind of Smith & Wesson that was used in the Civil War when Colonel Blue commanded his regiment. I've been studying the map all morning, comparing it with some of the maps we have here. It's a map of old Richview, all right, around the mid-1800s, I'd guess. Some of these old buildings still exist, and I recognize some of the landmarks marked by an X here. For example, Lone Tree is over by Buccaneer Beach. Wraith Rock, as you know, is that huge stone in Riverside Park. Instead of marking the location of the treasure, this map gives 4 possible locations and some cryptic notes. Now, I suppose we could send dig teams to each location, but the Historical Society only has enough funds at the moment to finance one excavation.
What could that mean? President Jackson's namesake. Could he be referring to the statue of President Jackson in Riverside Park? Wraith Rock is in Riverside Park, too.
I'll bet we can find out some background on Colonel Blue here at the library. A little research into the Civil War might help us decipher the map.
Colonel Beau Blue? Ah, he's quite a famous figure here. You might try checking some of our local history books to get the details of his story. I vaguely remember that there was some talk of a buried treasure. Have you spoken to Mr. Cohn, the owner of Sweet Treats? He's a real Civil War buff. He and some of his friends take part in Civil War battle reenactments every year. They research the time period and battles very carefully, then create authentic costumes and reenact the strategies used by famous Civil War generals. I'm sure he'd love to help you with your investigation.
Wraith Rock is right there on the edge of the path. And there's the statue of Andrew Jackson. This rock has been here since the founding of Richview. My dad says that the name comes from its spooky shape. Wraith means ghost. Mr. Cone is the owner of Sweet Treats. We're lucky to catch him while he's in the shop.
I've studied the Civil War in great detail. It's a hobby of mine. Actually, my wife says it's an obsession. Anyway, each year I join up with a group that reenacts some of the famous battles like Gettysburg and Shiloh. We use replicas of the old guns and other weapons used by soldiers in those days, and wear costumes that look exactly like the uniforms of the Union and Confederacy. We honor the soldiers from that war, but it was a terrible waste of life. Almost as many Americans died in the Civil War as in every other war this country has ever fought, combined.
Mr. Cohen has always been interested in history. In fact, I think he bought this site as a location for his ice cream parlor because it used to be a famous tavern.
That's right. I started Sweet Treats on the site of the old Liberty Tavern. I like the idea of owning a store on a famous landmark.
In the 1800s, the Liberty Tavern was a favorite drinking and socializing spot. But when alcohol was banned during Prohibition in 1920, the tavern went out of business.
I've got the old tavern sign back here above the counter for luck. It's an antique.
Mr. Duffy's had bad luck with his crops the last few years. If the treasure is buried here, maybe he'll be able to use some of the money to help fix up his farm.
I did a little research on the area before I bought this farm 10 years ago. There was a mining company here back in the 1800s. They dug shafts deep into the earth looking for silver. Mining was a really big industry in this part of the country in those days. When the silver ran out, they sealed up the caverns so that people wouldn't mess around in them and get hurt.
Buccaneer Beach is a great place to go swimming. I bet these people had no idea that a treasure might be buried nearby.
Yo, Sherlock Holmes types. What's happening? Out here to catch some waves?
Not today, Steve. We're on a case. Do you know anything about that tree up there?
Lone Tree? Yeah, that's like a totally ancient landmark. That old hickory tree has been there for centuries. My grandfather proposed to my grandma there. I go up there to read sometimes, you know. It's got an excellent view. I heard a legend that this was the first tree planted by the settlers who founded Richview in the early 1800s.
We've got the clues we need. Pick the 5 clues that you think will best show the Historical Society where to dig. Those are the clues we needed. Now choose the site where you think Colonel Blue buried his treasure. The map said that the treasure was buried by President... Let's look over our... We've got the clues we need. Pick the 5 clues that you think will best... Those are the clues we need. You're right. The treasure is buried near Lone Tree. Let's check the evidence. The treasure map that Colonel Bo Blue made showed 4 possible sites for the buried treasure, but it said that the loot was buried near President Jackson's namesake. Wraith Rock in Riverside Park was one of the landmarks on the map, and it's near a statue of President Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was president before the Civil War, but the statue of him in Riverside Park wasn't put there until 1967. Colonel Blue couldn't have known that it would be there. At the library, we learned that President Andrew Jackson was president before the Civil War, so Colonel Blue would have known about him. We also read that President Jackson's nickname was Old Hickory. Colonel Blue would have known that too. The tree called Lone Tree, up by Buccaneer Beach, is a hickory tree. The founders of Richview planted it as a landmark many years before Colonel Blue arrived. Colonel Blue buried his treasure underneath that old hickory tree.